Hi, this is Marilyn with the North Raleigh Seed Library, and today we're going to be talking about dealing with deer in the garden to help prevent damage to your landscape and your plants. I think we need to learn to understand deer. They are beautiful, graceful creatures with a very gentle appearance, those great big brown eyes. The fawns are just absolutely adorable. They play like, children, and we just fall in love with them. So this is not about hating deer at all. They're not evil. They're just doing what deer do, which is eat. And they eat a lot because they're basically eating spinach. You know, when you go to the store and you buy a lettuce mix or spinach, and in those big plastic clamshells, and that weighs 10 ounces. A doe needs to eat about 11 of those a day. Think of stacking up 11 of those big clamshells full of lettuce leaves or spinach leaves. That's how much one doe eats one day, every day of the year. Bambi eats a little bit less, and a buck will eat quite a bit more. That's a lot of vegetation disappearing from your landscape or your garden every single day of the year. Now do the math for a small herd and, multiply that by 6 to 15. I mean, I've even seen 24 deer in my yard at a time. And I mean, that's an incredible amount of vegetation that's being consumed. And the cost of that is across the country runs into the billions and billions of dollars in damage to our landscapes and gardens. So I just want to make sure people understand I don't hate deer. What I do hate is the damage they're doing to my garden that I've spent so much time working on, spent so much money on, and it's very frustrating. And I completely understand people's frustration when that happens to them. If somebody came along, my husband is a car guy, if someone came along and keyed his cars, he would not be happy. Well, when the deer eat things in my garden, I feel the same way. They vandalize something that's precious to me. They're not just damaging your garden, they're damaging the entire ecosystem. If I go up to Blue Jay Point County Park, which is near us, 30 years ago, I couldn't see very far off the trail because there were all kinds of low plants growing near the ground and shrubs in the middle area and understory trees. You couldn't see very far off the trail. All of those plants and shrubs and trees are necessary parts of the ecosystem to support the insects, amphibians, reptiles, small mammals, and birds that also live in the ecosystem. The deer come in and they eat everything up to 4 or 5 feet high. And the only things that survive are things like painted buckeye up at Blue Jay Point County Park, for example. It's a beautiful shrub, and it was always there, but now it's like the only thing that's there. And it's a gorgeous shrub, and it supports hummingbirds when they first come back from the south, but it doesn't support caterpillars that the parent birds need to feed the baby birds. And so the whole food chain is impacted. The little critters have nowhere to hide. The deer are destroying the ecosystem almost as much as if there were bulldozers. And so all of the other animal species that live in our ecosystem are at risk, and some of the plants are endangered. For example, terrestrial orchids, the orchids that live in the ground, and the deer happen to love them. And they're disappearing. They're endangered and threatened because of the overpopulation of deer. One thing that I hear all the time is, but the poor deer have nowhere else to go. And I totally sympathize with the deer that, in my case, deer moved into my neighborhood in 2002. And I totally sympathize with the deer that used to live in the deep woods and the fields and pastures across the main road from me. The deer got pushed out of their home and they moved into our suburban neighborhood. But that's where the poor deer part ends, because once they got here, they were deliriously happy. They're thriving here. They're absolutely thriving. What is a deer's favorite habitat? It's a clearing in the woods, because in a clearing, you have more sunlight. If you have more sunlight, you have more plant material. You have more plant material, you have more for the deer to eat. And not just more quantity, but more variety will grow in more sun. And then the other part about a clearing that deer like is if any danger threatens, they run and hide in the bushes and the trees just at the edge of the clearing. Well, what are our suburban yards? What are our urban yards? They're clearings. We cut down some of the trees so we have to build the house, and so we have some sun. And then we have a wide variety of plants in our gardens and landscapes. Lots of sunlight means more plant material, more nutritious plant material, and then we water and fertilize our. So we've got a buffet for them, you know? They're thrilled. And beyond that, no humans are hunting them in suburban and urban yards. We have instituted leash laws. There are no packs of wild dogs or feral dogs or anything running around in our suburban and urban yards to chase the deer away. And then they have this nutritious food. So for so many reasons, it's not the poor deer here in our suburban and urban yards. They are very happy here. They're absolutely thriving. They're way better off than they were in the deep woods and the pastures where they used to live. I've read about how many deer per square mile would be in deep woods, and I've read estimates like 2 to 3. And, you know, maybe the numbers aren't quite right, but I think you'll get the picture here. Maybe in woods with a little bit more sunlight, or there's some pastures nearby, there might be 8 to 10 deer per square mile. Estimates where people have counted the deer population density in urban and suburban environments, it's at least 45 per square mile, 60 per square mile, 80 per square mile, even 100 deer per square mile. And we created the problem. The deer did not create this problem. We created the problem. We eliminated the wolves, who were their natural predators, so there really are no real predators left for deer. The biggest predator for deer in Wake County is cars. Outside of areas where they can be counted, it's cars. And that's just so tragic for both the deer and the humans involved. In my neighborhood, the deer first moved in 2002, and there were several people in my neighborhood, very good-hearted, well-meaning people who started feeding the deer. And what happened then is that instead of having one fawn every year, which is normal for deer, they were having 3. But you do the math, and when you have 3 children every year and no predators, the herd size just increases so fast. And the reason that all of this matters is that it's going to impact what you can do, what's going to be effective to manage deer where you are. If you are at the point where there's only 2 or 3 deer per square mile, and they're still wary of humans because they recently lived somewhere where they were hunted, if you just open the door, if you just appear, they're going to run off, okay? And they're probably only going to come to your yard at night. So the methods that you can use to deal with them are going to be very different than where I am now, where I have not just light or moderate or heavy deer pressure, I have extreme deer pressure. Somebody who is feeding them just insane amounts of deer corn a month has moved away. And between the drought that we've had here for the past 11 months and this buffet of an enormous amount of deer corn no longer being available to them, the deer are suffering, and I feel sorry for them. And the drought is one thing, but we created the problem. Somebody fed them, and now they're no longer feeding them. And that's not, the answer to that is not feed them. The answer is don't ever start feeding them in the first place. Every national, state, county, city park has a sign up when you enter it, please do not feed the wildlife. And that's not just for your own safety, that's for the health and well-being of the creatures that you might be trying to feed. It's well-meaning, but they didn't evolve. Deer didn't evolve to eat a steady diet, an ample diet of corn. It's much too rich for them. It actually creates some health problems. Plus, if you're feeding them and they're congregating in one area, disease is going to spread so much faster among that deer herd. Things like black or blue tongue disease or chronic wasting disease are going to spread faster. Just to explain a little bit about the impact when you have this many deer in your environment. In the wintertime especially, there's less for the deer to eat, and they'll be eating things that are not really nutritious for them or good for them, and they're going to strip all of your shrubs that have any leaves on them up to 4 or 5 feet high. If you want to understand more about the impact of no predators on large herbivores and what that does to the ecosystem, Google Yellowstone and what happened to the elks when many decades ago they killed off all the wolves. The elks kind of went wild. There were lots and lots of elks, and they're no longer wary because there's no predators chasing them, and they eat everything. Instead of being browsers, which deer or elks or something should be, which is natural for them, where a browser will take a bite here, nibble here, take a bite, stop and look around, am I safe? And then go take a little bite over here. Those are browsers, and that's what deer are supposed to do. That's what the way they evolved to be. When there's no predators and they're not afraid of us anymore, because once they move into our suburbs and urban areas, it doesn't take them long to figure out, oh, I don't get shot at here. I don't need to be afraid of these people. They're really slow and really harmless. And most of their dogs are too small to do anything to bother them. I have my son has a little golden doodle, 30-pound, sweet little dog. He chases the deer and he barks at him with that yip, yip, yip. And they basically, he can chase off one deer, but if there's a herd of them, they toy with him. They're like playing with him, teasing him. A big dog like my other son's 110-pound bull mastiff, if he's there, he gives out one big, deep, throaty bark, just one bark, and charges at him like a freight train, and they'll all take off running. So if you've got a great big dog who's out in your yard 24/7, hey, that's great deer protection. But if you put the dog in at night, guess what? They're going to do at night. So dogs can be a great help, but unless they're out in the yard 24/7, not a total solution. Back to Yellowstone, when they reintroduced wolves, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago, the whole ecosystem went back to normal, and it was just such a beautiful thing. They actually didn't reduce the size of the elk herd that much, but the elk became wary again. They stopped completely grazing in one area like cattle and sheep do, which, just wipes out everything in one area. They started taking a bite here and there and browsing and becoming wary. And it allowed things to grow up along the riverbanks, and things that grew up along the riverbanks then allowed the insects and the birds and the beavers and all these other creatures to return. And the ecosystem is now blossoming again because it's in balance between herbivores and predators. When deer first move into your neighborhood, when deer pressure is very light, and they're still wary of humans and dogs, I would call that light deer pressure. So you can do things like read the books about what is a deer-resistant plant. For example, most books will tell you that black-eyed Susans are deer-resistant plants. Well, they are when you have light deer pressure. Black-eyed Susans have hairy, kind of sandpapery leaves, if you feel them. And so the deer tend to avoid those when deer pressure is light. When deer pressure gets a little heavier, there's more of them trying to eat in the same environment. They're going to start eating things that aren't quite as palatable. So they're going to start eating those black-eyed Susans. One of the tricks that I found is for plants that are supposed to be deer resistant, or that deer only occasionally browse. If I have one plant by itself, one black-eyed Susan plant by itself, the deer will eat it almost to the ground. If I plant a big patch of those plants, the deer might nibble around the edges of that patch, but they'll mostly leave all of them alone. So that's one technique you can try, is plant in drifts, large drifts. And that seems to work a little bit better with plants that, yeah, they're deer resistant, but when they're hungry, when there's too many of them, they will nibble and eat it. Another technique is to plant things that they don't like, things with fuzzy leaves like lamb's ear or rose campion, they tend to avoid. Things with a minty smell such as black and blue salvia, anything in the salvia family, mint family, which includes rosemary, oregano, things like that. It's got a very strong flavor, which is why humans like it to season food, but those strong flavors evolved to keep animals from eating them. So you can plant plants that the deer don't like because of the texture of the leaf, or the fragrance of the leaf, or the actual taste of the leaf. Some plants have a milky sap in stems, which are alkaloid and have a very bitter taste. So they have to take a bite to figure that out. So there are lists of plants online, and you can find resources that will tell you this plant is one that deer rarely eat, this is one that deer occasionally eat, this is one that is deer candy, and decide what to plant. When the deer pressure is light, that works. That works. When deer are starving, they will eat anything. Solution when deer are desperate for food, when they can't because of drought, or someone stopped feeding them recently, or a really cold winter, the solution isn't feed them. It isn't supplement the food. And maybe that sounds cruel, but any animal species, if the resources in that area aren't adequate for that animal to nourish itself, what does it do? It has legs. It moves. It goes and finds greener pastures somewhere else. Your plants can't get up and move. They're at the mercy of the deer, you know. But the deer will find other resources somewhere else. As the deer pressure in your area increases and we're moving to moderate or moderate toward heavy, you're going to have to consider physical barrier methods. One is you can put up cages around plants. I bought, in 2002, I bought a beautiful oak leaf hydrangea from a local nursery. Planted it, and it bloomed, and it was beautiful for 3 months. And then the deer moved in. And they ate my 4-foot tall plant down to 4-inch tall sticks, like overnight. And so I started spraying it, and I sprayed and sprayed and sprayed, and they still would find one time to eat it when I hadn't sprayed enough or often enough. So what I did is I put a wire cage around it, a welded wire cage. Now, oak leaf hydrangeas grow in shade, and guess what happens with wire cage in the shade? It pretty much disappears from sight. This is at the top of my driveway. It's about 20 feet from the road. And people, what happened with that poor hydrangea that was 4-inch sticks, it was 5 years of spraying that didn't work, and it would grow and they'd eat it to sticks, it'd grow, they'd eat it to sticks. Well, once I caged it, in one season, that hydrangea, oak leaf hydrangea, was over 6 feet tall. And it was gorgeous. It was absolutely gorgeous. And then it started blooming again, because many things that bloom on old wood, if the deer ate it last summer, last fall, or this winter, no flowers this spring, right? Started being beautiful again. So the way that I like to make the cages is there's a welded wire. It has 2x4 openings in the wire. You can get it in 4-foot rolls, 5-foot rolls. Depends on how tall your shrub is, but I would say at least 4 foot high reduces deer leaning over and eating into it. And to me, the simplest way to make a barrier method, some people will take a length of wire. So remember that pi, the circumference of a circle is pi times the diameter of the circle. So if you want a cage that's 5 feet across, you need about a 15-foot length of wire. Take the two ends of it and overlap it. Now, some people will cut the wires and bend them and all the way down and lock them together. And that's great. It's very sturdy. It works. You didn't need to use any extra materials, just needed to have some pliers to do that with. The problem is when that plant grows too big and you need a bigger cage. Now it's a real pain to unbend the wires and open that thing up and get it off. And maybe the plant has grown bushy out like this and you can't lift it up anymore. So what I like to do is I overlap the two ends by 1 row of the holes in the wire, and I take a piece of rebar that's maybe a foot taller than the height of my wire, and I weave it in and out of the overlapped holes. You don't have to weave it in and out of every hole in the wire, but just a few at the top, a few in the middle, a few in the bottom will work. And then use a mallet or a hammer and pound it into the ground maybe a foot. I then use landscape staples and I pin down the cage in 3 or 4 spots around the bottom of the cage. And that's enough. That welded wire is strong enough that that will work. Chicken wire will not work. Chicken wire is not strong. The animals will push against it and they'll eat it through the holes in the wire. So chicken wire, it needs more support. That sturdy welded wire can stand on its own if you pin it down so that they can't push it over. When you need to replace the cage with a bigger one because the plant has grown, or it's just that, okay, in the summer they don't bother this plant, they only bother it in the winter. In the summer, I don't want the cage there. Pull the rebar up, take the wire, you can lay it out flat, you can roll it up, you can store it more compactly. So that's my method for making the cage. If the cage is in the shade, it won't be real visible. Some of the tricks of hiding cages or wire, it's like, I don't think that galvanized metal is especially attractive in the garden. I paint the wire. I paint anything that's galvanized wire, I paint it. You can spray paint it, you can brush it, or you can roll it. Whatever you want to do, whatever works for you. Whether it's welded wire, chicken wire, whether you're using those concrete ladders. You've seen the landscapers use them. It's like 2 wires that are 10 feet long and they have a few horizontal things. That's a concrete wire. You can buy it in the concrete department at your local big box store. And you can make an arch out of it, and then you can put bird netting or chicken wire or something across the top of it to protect your bed of pansies or whatever. But those galvanized wires show up. The chicken wire shows up. And if I paint it one of two sort of categories. I either paint it a color to match the mulch that's around the plants. So if you're using shredded leaves or arborist wood chips, they age to sort of a taupey color. And I use a taupe color paint to paint it. The cage kind of almost disappears. You can see the plant. You don't focus on the cage. If you're using triple shredded hardwood mulch or that dyed brown mulch, for example, get a brown spray paint. If you're using pine straw, fresh pine straw, get a reddish brown looking paint. Something called cinnamon or something would work. The key on using paint is it's got to be flat paint, not satin, not semi-gloss, not gloss. Anything that reflects light will show up. That is very visible. Black to me shows up a little bit more in the landscape than trying to match a color of what the cage is covering. If I'm putting a cage around something that's evergreen, like my camellias, a camouflage product, a deep forest green or an army green. What I don't like to use is there are forest green paints that have a lot of blue in them. There are very few leaves in nature that are that bluish green color. And so I'd recommend looking for a green paint that has a little yellow in the color. It will blend in better. The other thing that I don't like to do is you can buy welded wire that has a green plastic coating over it. And that sounds like an awesome idea. It's not going to rust as fast, and it's green. Well, all my plants are green, right? It's going to hide. You're not going to see the green plastic coating. The wire is going to disappear. No, because that green plastic coating is bluish green. And if any sunlight hits it with time, it will turn really blue, and then it really shows up. If you're just trying to protect a small plant, like the deer are now eating my lungwort, pulmonaria, they're eating my cyclamen. They're not reading the books anymore, by the way. They're eating things they aren't supposed to be eating. They're eating my wild ginger. They're eating my ferns. So now I will get baskets that were, I can buy them at a big box department store or an import store, or you can find them online. But get baskets that were meant to be decorative baskets for you to put maybe your fruit in, or a bunch of balls of yarn, or just do some decorative arrangement. And they're made of wire with chicken wire around them. And if they don't come in a color that matches your mulch, paint them. But you can get a smaller size basket. You turn it upside down over a small plant, a pansy or an impatiens or something else you want to protect, and use those landscape pins and pin it into the ground. That works until you get heavy deer pressure, and the deer learn that if they stomp your basket, they can make holes in it. So that's what happened eventually. But it worked for me for years. So you can use the baskets to protect things. Another way to use a wire basket is you can go to any sort of dollar store. They sell wire waste baskets. And you can take the wire waste baskets, turn them upside down, and put the landscape pins around them. They typically come in white and black, and they're very shiny. If you don't like that, paint them. But those baskets will work. Another idea to cover plants and protect them that's maybe a little bit more decorative, a little bit more artistic and attractive, is bird cages. They are fantastic for protecting your plants. I've used them in two different ways. You can hang the bird cage from a tree or a bracket mounted to a pole or side of your house. You can plant, if it's in the shade, plant hostas and toad lilies and impatiens, whatever you want in it, and it can be very attractive. You only have to hang it at 4 or 5 feet high. It doesn't have to be very high. You can still get the watering wand up there to water it easily, but that bird cage is attractive, and people will think you did this on purpose to be ornamental, instead of just trying to protect your plants. You can also take those bird cages, we'll cut the bottom off of them, and I will put them over my plant and use landscape staples to pin them down. If the spaces between the wires of the bird cage are too big that they can get their snout through, or they have very long tongues. If they can get that long tongue through there, then take bird netting or chicken wire and wrap it around the bird cage wire structure. Another problem you might have in the garden with deer is that in the late summer, the bucks they shed their antlers every year, and then they regrow new antlers every spring to summer. By late summer, the velvet that is around the antlers is starting to get really itchy, and they want to rub it all off. Where do they rub it off? They rub it off on the trunks of your sapling trees or shrubs that are maybe 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches in diameter, because that fits perfectly in the forks of their antlers to rub it, And when they do that, they rub off the bark on your trees, and that can kill your trees. If it doesn't kill them, it might make half the tree die, or maybe they're breaking off branches doing this. You can buy from a number of sources online or at different stores sort of a protective cage that you can put around, or fencing that you can put around the tree trunk. And those work. They're fine. I wasn't especially fond of the look of that. So what I did is I got 4-inch corrugated black plastic drain pipe from home improvement type store. And I get the kind that's perforated, which means it has little holes or slits in it, so there's some air movement in the pipe. It's meant for water to come out. I take a length of the pipe that is the length from the ground to the lowest limbs on the tree. And I cut the pipe that long, and then I cut a slit down the length of the pipe. And I take the pipe and I open up the split and I wrap it around the tree. Because of the holes, the perforations in the pipe, air is going to get in there. It's not going to cause mold or anything like that in your tree trunk. And it's got that corrugated surface, and it's 4 inches in diameter, too big for the bucks to use it to rub their antlers against. It worked beautifully to protect my trees. But it's black perforated plastic pipe. It's super cheap. You can buy a 10-foot length of that stuff for almost nothing, and you can probably protect 4 trees with that easily. You leave it on the trees, put it on in maybe middle of August before they start rubbing, hopefully, and you can take it off usually by mid-October when the velvet is all rubbed off of the antlers, and your trees will generally be safe then until the next late summer. So that worked really well. It was really cheap. It was really easy. It was really to take it off and store it. It was okay to put it behind the shed or underneath the deck. Doesn't matter if it gets wet. Perfect. It just wasn't as attractive as I wanted. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to have a little fun. Did you ever really look at bark? There are so many different bark patterns in bark and so many different bark colors. Like the pattern on a young dogwood tree is almost like, not checkered, but it's a light gray and a darker gray. The bark on a cherry tree, a young cherry tree, is sort of a brownish purple, a dark brownish purple, and it's got little horizontal lines called lenticels in it. The bark on a young beech tree is a really pale gray. You know, the bark is different tree to tree. You remember when we were kids and we had a box of crayons and there were like 12 colors in it, and you pulled out the brown one to color tree trunks? There was no tree trunk on earth that's that color. But what I did is I took paints. I had a bunch of different cans of leftover paint in my garage, and I got all the different paints. And what I didn't have, I bought those little tiny craft bottles of paint, so I didn't have to spend a fortune. And I had fun painting bark on that corrugated plastic, and I made it match the tree I was going to put it on. So the cherry tree looked one way, and what I was putting on the dogwood sapling looked different, and so on. And it was really fun. It was a fun, crafty project. I had my kids help me, and it kind of disappeared. You didn't see it. By the time that the tree trunk is 3-4 inches in diameter, you probably won't need to protect it anymore. It's just when they're young. But that's one way that deer can really damage the young trees or shrubs in your landscaping. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you don't want to just protect individual plants, and you might consider fencing up against a building or wall. For example, after 5 years of spraying, I had big hostas in front of my garage, and I got tired of spraying to protect the hostas. I went to one of the big box stores, and they sell black wrought iron looking fence panels that are 36 to 4 feet, maybe 54 inches each panel long, and at the end of the panel they have 2 rings up at the top and at the bottom. And then you buy posts that you overlap the rings on the ends of 2 panels and stick a post through it. I put up 40 feet of fencing in 30 minutes by myself. I didn't even need to use a hammer. Just push that pole through the 4 holes, the 4 rings into the ground. And the beauty of a system like that is it doesn't fence me out. I still need to get in there to weed, to plant, to mulch, to maybe harvest. And if you put that fence 4 feet, no more than 4 feet away from the wall of your garage, shed, house, any kind of, structure, the deer are not going to jump into it. As long as we're talking a fence that's hopefully close to 4 feet tall. If you have light deer pressure, my fence that I started out with was 32 inches tall, and that worked in the beginning with light deer pressure. 4 foot is better. The taller the fence, the better. Well, eventually they figured out they could stick their faces in between the upright bars of the fence. That, some of the openings were wider than others. They could stick their faces through, or they could stick their long tongues through. And so what I did is I got some chicken wire that was the height of what I need of my fence, and I painted it flat black, and I used the cut ends of the chicken wire. I made it the length of each panel and used the ends to just secure it to that fence panel, so I can still pull a pole out, swing that fence panel out like a gate to get in there and do what I need to do, and then put it back and put the pole back in the hole. But the chicken wire from 10 feet away, if it's painted, it disappears. Just disappears from view. And that was perfect for keeping them from reaching through the fence, damaging anything. That worked great for a while. Eventually, the 32-inch fence wasn't tall enough, so I needed to make it taller. You can buy these little folding fence panels. They're made of metal, and they might have a fleur-de-lis design on them or something like that, but little folding things, and they're wired together. There's maybe 10 panels in this series. They're inexpensive. You can get them 12 inches tall, 18 inches tall, 24 inches tall. I got the height that I needed, and I wired that to the top of my fence. And it actually kind of looks like it belongs there, and it worked. So that worked. I got permission to fence my backyard, and I started off with 2 4-foot tall rows of fencing 4 feet apart. So it's kind of like I have 2 concentric rings around my backyard of 4-foot tall fencing. The outer ring that I used is the fence that really does the job. The inner ring of the fencing really doesn't have to be much. It doesn't have to be expensive. It could be 3 wires strung at 48 inches, 36 inches, and 18 inches on some T-posts that are 20 feet apart. And that's enough for the inner ring. It just needs to be enough that the deer don't think they can jump in safely or jump back out safely. So deer are prey animals, eyes on the side of the head. They don't have good depth perception. Predators with bifocal vision have the depth perception. Deer not so hot. And so it somehow messes with them with their depth perception. They don't want to jump over the 2 rows of 4-foot tall fencing. You could do 2 rows of 5-foot tall fencing 5 feet apart. That also works. The concept was developed for use in agricultural fields about 30 years ago. And believe me, if somebody's got a field of strawberries or corn or something like that that they want to protect from deer, it's expensive to erect and then maintain an 8 or 10-foot tall fence. It's a lot less expensive to maintain a 4-foot tall fence. I'm 73. I didn't want to be climbing up on a 10-foot ladder to erect and maintain an 8-foot tall fence. So this was perfect for me. I was able to put this fencing up by myself. And I would recommend that you paint the T-posts anyway, because the T-posts come bright, shiny green with a reflective white coating on the top, so that the top 6 inches of the post really shows up. So I painted all of mine, again, those same flat paint colors to blend in with what they were next to. So buy rusty ones. A rust-colored post is going to disappear in your landscape. It's going to look like a tree trunk color. You won't see it. But if you want to, paint it. So don't shy away from the $1 or $2 a piece T-post you can buy used on Facebook Marketplace. You don't have to use welded wire. Welded wire works really well as a cage around a plant you're trying to protect. Welded wire as a fencing material, the inexpensive, lightweight welded wire, as a fencing material between T-posts, if a deer crashes into it, if you've got a herd of deer who've been spooked and are running, and they crash into that welded wire, they're going to break all the welds. It's going to come apart. You can get black plastic deer netting that's made to keep deer out, and it often comes with 2-inch holes in it. It's really thick plastic that is UV resistant, so the sunlight is not going to damage it in a year and a half. It will last at least 10-15 years. You can get it 8 foot tall to erect an 8 foot tall fence. You can also check around online to buy this stuff. I found a source that sold it 4 foot tall. They had taken the 8 foot black plastic deer netting, and they had cut it all the way down the middle, the length of the roll, for 4 foot. And they were marketing it to fence dogs as a temporary dog fencing. And it works beautifully for that. But I wanted 2 4 foot tall fences, and I don't have a huge budget. I wanted to do this as economically as possible. So a 330-foot roll of this 4 foot tall fencing cost me $99. And it only weighed like a pound or 2 for the whole roll of it. The wire, the stuff I would have loved to have used would have been what they call woven wire field fencing, like you'll see around horse pastures, or they use for sheep or goats, cattle, that kind of thing. The woven wire, if the large animal bumps into it, it stretches and it comes back. It doesn't stay permanently bent. That stuff is fantastic. It's also really super expensive, and it's 330 pounds for a 330-foot roll. There's no way on earth I'm manipulating a 330-pound roll of wire fencing. you know, that might be real easy to do if you're a farmer out in a field and you've got a tractor of some sort that you can mount this thing on to stretch it and pull it tight, and you don't have trees and shrubs, you just got a clear field. It works great for that. I had an established landscape, and when I checked with fencing companies to see what they would charge me to come and do this kind of thing, put up fences for me, they wanted me to cut down all shrubbery and trees within 10 feet of the fence so they could get their heavy equipment in there. Like, no, that defeats the whole point of what I'm trying to do, you know? So I did do this myself. In addition to the black plastic deer netting that's made for deer that you can buy online, another fencing material you can use is called cattle panels or livestock panels. It might be for goat or sheep or whatever, but they're usually 16 feet long, and you can get it 50 inches tall. You also can get I think it's a 34, a shorter version that's either 34 or 39 inches tall. I did the 50-inch tall, 16-foot long one. The stuff is very sturdy. It works very well. I will say that it does great at keeping the adult deer out. However, when the fawns are first born, the holes in that cattle panel one, the holes are 6 inches tall and 8 inches wide. And a young fawn can jump through the third or fourth row of holes running full speed. I mean, just boom, they go right through it. It's like blew my mind. Like, how did you do that? I don't know how they, oh my gosh, it was just amazing. As they get a little bit, and fawns fortunately grow really fast because it wasn't very many weeks before they were too big to fit through the holes anymore. But again, I did find fawns inside my deer fencing for several weeks. And again, fawns eat everything. They haven't been trained yet on what not to eat. So you might, if you use the cattle panel as your outer fencing, you might need to you put chicken wire or something up temporarily, just a short, like 2 foot of it, just to keep them from coming through. I just dealt with the damage for a few weeks. If you use your outer ring, as your outer ring, you use that black plastic deer netting. A couple of comments on that. If you ever need to use a string trimmer to trim the grass that might be growing near the black plastic, or you use a weed flame torch to wilt the Japanese stilt grass that is growing all over the place near this black plastic, it was weed torch 1 and black plastic netting 0, and string trimmer 1 and black plastic 0. So if you're using the black plastic deer netting, think about what you might be doing there as to whether or not that's going to work for you, and maybe you need to use some wire fencing in those situations. That's what I ended up having to switch to in the area where I had those problems. If you are mounting any kind of wire fencing to T-posts or U-posts, they sell these clips that come in a bag, like enough to do, I don't know, 6 T-posts or something. And they're fairly inexpensive, and you take those clips and you sort of hook them around the horizontal wire and around the T-post, and then you bend the wire with a special tool, or I just used pliers and bent the wire around it. That works really great, and it's not expensive, and it's not too hard. I was able to do it. And a huge buck and 2 huge does figured out how to jump my fence. And so I have had to go 8 foot tall. I figured out a way. If you've got T-posts, you can take a U-post, which is also sold at agricultural supply stores, and the post is shaped like a U. It has the same flange at the bottom. It's a lighter duty than a T-post is. I wouldn't use that for deer as the fence in the ground. And I bent them using a vise and a big pounding mallet. I bent them so they fit around the T-post, like, hugged it around the T-post. I slid it onto the top of that T-post, and then I used really strong zip ties that are made to be UV resistant and 220 pound strength. And you can buy those at the online stores that sell black plastic deer fencing products. And I took those zip ties and I just, the flange was wrapped around it, but just to make it a little more secure. And then I put the 4-foot tall black plastic deer netting up on top. It disappears from sight 20 feet away and you don't see that black plastic deer netting. And it's worked beautifully. I did put monofilament. It's plastic. You can get steel cable, but I did put a line up at the top all the way around. I used something called hog rings. I put it through, there's a hole at the top of the U-post and I put a hog ring on it. It's a metal ring that's black. It's easy to bend. And I ran the wire, the monofilament wire through there. And I didn't make it super snug. I wanted, if a rotten tree branch falls out of my tree or there's a storm, I want my fence to have a chance of not being destroyed. And so far, that's worked well. So far that has helped me. Another fencing idea, which doesn't require 2 rows of 4-foot tall fencing or going 8-foot tall. If you've already got a 4 or 5-foot tall fence, like chain link or any kind of wire, something like that, deer will jump 4 feet super easy if they can see on the other side of it. They have to know that what they land on is safe to land on. Okay, so if you have an existing chain link fence, for example, I've seen people take 4-foot wide black landscape fabric that's meant for putting under mulch to suppress weeds. So black landscape fabric can be useful to mount on your chain link fence so the deer can't see through it. And I know people who have used that to keep them from jumping their existing fence. Another friend of mine erected a 5-foot tall solid wood fence all around her backyard. Again, deer won't jump if they can't see the other side of it. I know someone whose garden backs up to some deep woods, and there's a gully that runs down through the backyard. And there was a lot of erosion in there. And so he got a lot of riprap, which is medium to large size stones, not little stones that might wash away, but big. You're going to need a hand truck to move these things. It's maybe 8 or 10 feet wide that he lined this whole gully with it. The deer come out of the woods and stop at the riprap. They don't cross it. I think they fear foot entrapment. And these are not goats we're trying to keep out. These are deer. But the deer don't cross his riprap. I had a friend who had a 4-foot tall white painted wooden picket fence along her driveway. And on the other side of the wooden picket fence, she had a line of rose bushes, beautiful rose bushes. Well, rose bushes are deer candy. And she didn't have enough. She had that 2 rows of 4-foot fencing, 4 feet apart, all around the rest of her front yard. But right there by the driveway, there wasn't enough room. The driveway was kind of narrow, and you needed to be able to open the car door and step out. And if she'd put another fence 4 feet apart, you couldn't open the car door. So she used welded wire with the 2x4 openings, and she suspended it 2 or 3 inches above the ground. And so there's this fence this wire that's laying across the ground, and then a 4-foot tall fence. The deer can't get up to the 4-foot tall fence to jump over it. They get to the wire and they don't want to step on that wire. Their foot might get stuck in it. Chicken wire with 2-inch holes would also work. The only maintenance required for this is you got to blow the leaves off in the fall. If the leaves mat up on it, then there's no foot entrapment risk anymore. But that worked for her, and it protected her roses. Another way you can use fear of foot entrapment is in the wintertime, the deer were eating my azaleas. I had inherited from the previous owner these 12-foot tall indica azaleas. Formosa azaleas with huge, juicy, apparently delicious leaves. And every winter, the deer were eating every leaf 4 feet up. And this was before I had the backyard fenced. And so I took that concept of foot entrapment fear with laying the wire, the 4-foot wire, 2 or 3 inches off the ground, and I put that around the azalea bushes I wanted to protect. From a distance, from the backyard windows, I couldn't see that wire on the ground. People walking past my yard couldn't see that wire on the ground. The HOA had nothing to complain about because they couldn't see the wire on the ground. But it did a perfect job of keeping the deer from eating that shrub in the winter months. And then summer, once the spring happened and the deer had more to eat, they left those azaleas alone. I took up that wire I had laid on the ground all the way around, stored it, and now I could mow the lawn again up to the bushes. If you're going to fence your yard in, you probably need some gates. And you can build gates out of wood, you can build them out of different things. What I did, because I wanted gates, especially on the front of my yard, to be really attractive, I bought metal trellises. I wanted them a little taller. My husband welds. He welded on an extra row at the bottom of the trellis. He welded on hinges on the sides and a gate latch in the middle. And I spray painted them a moss green because that's the color I like. And it worked with my stuff. And I screwed them into the wooden 4x4 posts, and now I have beautiful gates. So, be creative, think outside the box. You can come up with ways to manage, live with deer in your area and still have a nice garden and a beautiful landscape. Thank you all. And again, if you have any questions, put them in the comments and we'll try to get to them.